Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Panayi, and in today's podcast I'll be reading from an essay I wrote called Mindfulness and Forgiveness. Since an early age I've been very interested in Eastern philosophy, Eastern spirituality, and as I got older I developed an interest in psychology, in Western psychology, and then of course eventually I came to A Course in Miracles. My interest in Eastern philosophies and spiritualities has remained. And I find that doing a comparative study of aspects of A Course in Miracles with other things, whether it be Western philosophy or Eastern philosophy and psychology, I find that comparative study really helps to get a clearer picture of the Course itself and its practice and principles. So I wrote these particular essays, part 1 and part 2 of Mindfulness and Forgiveness, with the intent of flushing out for myself the differences, what makes Buddhism and the mindfulness practice differentiated from the practice of forgiveness in A Course in Miracles. A lot of people talk about the forgiveness practice as like becoming an observer and being detached. That sounds very much like the Buddhist practice of mindfulness. But the forgiveness process of A Course in Miracles isn't the same as mindfulness. So I was interested in how we can really distinguish between the two and the philosophies or system of thought behind each practice and how they differ. So I will begin reading from part 1 of Mindfulness and Forgiveness. When it comes to health and well-being, trends are aplenty. Mindfulness practice is one such example. Recall the publishing rush on colouring books for adults, marketed as mindfulness tools. More than a Western trend, however, mindfulness is an important foundation of many Eastern philosophical and spiritual traditions. In its essence, it involves paying attention to what's in our mind, being open to everything and yet not clinging to anything. As each object arises into consciousness, we don't run with it or try and push it aside, but just look at it non-judgmentally. It is this open state of mind that allows us to let thoughts pass, as if we've neutralised them by our detachment. In contrast, cognitive fusion occurs when we become fixated on a thought and lose any sense of distance from it. We are that thought, stuck with it, moving with it, reacting, imagining, stressing, and planning. This state of autopilot or reactivity is rarely fun. There's a sense of urgency, discomfort, seriousness, and, most often, anxiety. Subtitle: Mindfulness and Buddhism. In Buddhism, mindfulness is known as the practice of recollection. We recall our attention to our mind, noticing what is going on within it in this present moment. It is like a fast for the mind, in which we stop indulging our thoughts. Untrained in the exercise of mindfulness, we too often allow ourselves to feast on thoughts as if at an all-you-can-eat banquet. Practicing mindfulness helps many people to calm and concentrate the mind. It also, however, has philosophical underpinnings central to Buddhism. All our suffering, according to the Buddha, comes from attachment, from wanting something and not getting it, or from wanting to avoid or be without something. Attachment occurs when we root our attention to the world and the body, and our mind becomes fixated on I, me, and mine. In this state, we're not open to a higher, abstract intelligence in which our true nature rests. The Buddha got his title from awakening to his true nature. The Sanskrit root Bud means to wake up or to know, and this awakened state is called nirvana. The etymology of nirvana is blowout, as in a fire which goes out due to a lack of air or fuel. Not clinging to or identifying with our thoughts, desires, and aversions is how we extinguish the fire of our ego or false self and all suffering. What is left, according to the Buddha, is love and compassion for all beings. The way of harmony and of well-being, then, is to be able to look without strongly identifying with anything, to remain an impartial observer who can act from inspiration that comes from a clear mind, beyond the muddy waters of desire and aversion. With this clarity, we can act with what Taoists call wu wei. And here's a quote from Lao Tzu. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? End of quote. Wu wei is to act without self-conscious striving, which is something that can only be done if we are free of desire and loathing, free of judgments regarding good and bad. Mindfulness helps us avoid getting fixed on an idea, stance, or opinion, and can short-circuit compulsive activity. Right effort in Buddhism is that which brings our attention back to our mind, to the here and now, with non-judgmental acceptance of sensations and thoughts, letting them pass. In this state, as an impartial observer, we're not so attached to I, me, and mine, not so caught up in craving and loathing, and so we're more peaceful and available to a greater intelligence which only resides in the reality of the present. Subtitle: Shame, Guilt, and A Course in Miracles. Like Buddhism, A Course in Miracles makes a distinction between the changing world of differences and opposites and an eternal, undifferentiated, abstract intelligence. It also maintains that an identification with the ego, I, and its attachments is at the heart of our suffering. Where the Course differs significantly from Buddhist philosophy is in the former's emphasis on our belief in sin and on our experience of shame and guilt. While both paths consider the I, me, and mine of the ego self to be the cause of suffering, the Course emphasises that I, me, and mine is equivalent to shameful, guilty me. This difference is a product of the metaphysical setups behind these two systems of thought. There is no creation myth in Buddhism. It starts with our problematic identification with the personal and aims toward a growing awareness of the universal. In contrast, the Course has a detailed myth surrounding the making of the world, which involves a creator and his relationship to the created. In the Course's myth, the world came about when a part of God's oneness fell asleep and dreamt it wanted to be separate, wanted to be autonomous, and a differentiated, special I. The world is a projection of this wish, seemingly made real, and we experience guilt for our imagined act of treason and fear God's reprisal. Having abandoned his love, we also fear abandonment in return, that we're no longer good enough to receive God's love and attention. We project these fears onto the world, fearing punishment and rejection from just about everyone and everything. It's a quote from the Course. All who believe in separation have a basic fear of retaliation and abandonment. End of quote. Identifying with separation, we also feel a fragment of our former abundant selves. We feel incomplete, shameful, NQR, and embark on an endless search to fill the hole. The source of all suffering then, according to the Course, is our shame and guilt. Quote, of all the many causes you perceived as bringing pain and suffering to you, your guilt was not among them. End of quote. The Course uses the word guilt for feelings which include shame. However, I've differentiated between the two because they lead to either fear of retaliation or of abandonment, respectively, and to specific, well-defined patterns of defence. More detail about this can be found in my book, Above the Battleground, The Courageous Path to Emotional Autonomy and Inner Peace. Shame and guilt are the source of our attachments. They have us craving some things, thinking they will save us, and loathing others, thinking they will harm us. To be identified with the ego self is to be in a state of fear. Healing, according to the Course, can therefore be described as a journey from fear to love. The Course doesn't focus on the fact that we have never left our source, but on our belief that we are in trouble, that God is out to get us, and that love is beyond our reach because of who we are. Where the Buddhist path might be called the way of clarity, whereby we seek to avail ourselves of a greater abstract intelligence, the Course's path could be called the way of relationship because it focuses on addressing the shame and guilt surrounding our relationship with God, reflected in our relationships with each other. Buddhism speaks directly to the condition of the mind caught up in the world of flux and opposites. The Course speaks directly to our deepest emotional needs related to approval, recognition, safety, and belonging. That shame and guilt are powerful motivators is perhaps most obvious in how advertising companies exploit our emotions to sell products. Indeed, Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, made his fortune showing American corporations how to tap into people's unconscious desires, thereby driving consumer behaviour. Instead of marketing a product based on its practical virtues, Bernays taught corporations how to appeal to people's need to feel good about themselves. For example, when the Betty Crocker Easy Bake Cake Mix first came onto the market in 1947, focus groups indicated women weren't buying it because they'd feel guilty for getting something that made cooking so easy. The company's solution was to provide the option of adding an egg when baking, and this had the desired effect of increasing sales dramatically. In the same era, advertising companies learned that cars could be marketed as symbols of male sexuality, strength and power, and voila, car sales soared. How easily we were manipulated in those days, and probably still are, just perhaps in different ways. Those ways have changed, perhaps becoming a bit more subtle rather than so starkly defined along gender lines. Anyway, back to the essay. Buddhism recognises that if we don't indulge judgments about how much effort goes into making a cake or how big our car is, and instead practice non-judgmental acceptance of what is in the here and now, we can let our mind rest in its natural calm state. And this is a quote from a Buddhist scholar, Khenpo Rinpoche. Quote, "Devotion is resting at ease in that most natural state, with nothing to give, nothing to gain, nothing to lose, and no one to praise or blame. No need for this, no need for that. Beyond hope and beyond fear, simply abide in the nature as is." End of quote. This is a lovely quote, and simply reflecting on it can be soothing. Sometimes, however, the intensity of our feelings and the stickiness of our thoughts and compulsions won't budge, or are frequent flyers that return again and again, day after day. The Course provides an explanation for these difficulties and an alternative way out through its unique definition of forgiveness. In short, the Course's forgiveness process leads to an "I'm okay, you're okay" kind of experience that is an indirect means of remembering our unity with God. The ins and outs of this process will be explored in Part 2. Mindfulness and Forgiveness, Part 2. We generally think of forgiveness as a conscious decision to let go of hatred towards someone we believe has harmed us. We mightn't like what someone has done, nor condone it, but we can, quote, forgive nonetheless by not letting hatred get the better of us. Forgiveness, as we usually define it, therefore involves overlooking the harm that we believe someone has done to us, thereby no longer holding a grievance towards them. The Course's definition of forgiveness is quite different. It maintains that we forgive someone when we realise that what they have done or failed to do can't prevent us from experiencing peace. If inner peace is our ideal, is something of ultimate value to us, and our capacity for peace isn't affected by someone's attack on us, then what do we have to forgive? This is the essential reasoning behind the Course's process of forgiveness. But the process itself takes a step back, offering a more grounded, practical means for eventually achieving this otherwise seemingly unattainable goal. Subtitle: Forgiveness and A Course in Miracles. Forgiveness, A Course in Miracles style, is based on the premise that we are never upset by a fact but by our interpretation of it. This is a concept widely used in modern cognitive behavioural therapy and assumes that our emotions are led by our thoughts. Forgiveness therefore relates to thoughts that say we have been hurt or disadvantaged in some way by someone else. On the level of form, of the body, we can be hurt by what others say or do, but the Course maintains that inner peace ultimately comes from a decision we make regarding the question, what am I? Identifying with the body, and therefore with shame and guilt, we will perceive ourselves as vulnerable, weak, and in need of certain things like support, approval, attention, respect from others in order to feel valued and safe. If we don't get these things, we feel wounded and experience anger and resentment. And if we get what we want, we feel, inverted commas, love. For example, if you yell at me and I have already identified with guilt, I will feel scared and blame you for it. If only you hadn't been so cruel. And if you praise me, I'm likely to feel happy and attribute my happiness to your praise. Again, I will give you power to set my mood. On the other hand, if I haven't identified with guilt or with shame and instead accept my inherent wholeness, I won't take your attack personally and I won't be fearful. Not identifying with shame and guilt is therefore how we let someone off the hook, because their attack has no effect on our peace or sense of worthiness. Forgiveness, therefore, has its foundation in addressing our self-concept. Subtitle: The Steps of Forgiveness. The first step in forgiveness is to realise that we are not upset by what someone has done, but by our interpretation of it. This brings the responsibility for our feelings back to our mind, where we can address the thoughts that are the real problem. Forgiveness relies on the psychological principle of projection. When we don't want to own something about ourselves, we repress it and project it out onto others. If I can't stand something I see in someone, it's because I've seen the same thing in myself and judged it harshly. I might then act in a way that denies that aspect of myself and become hyper-attuned to seeing it in others and judge them accordingly. A well-known example is homophobia. It can be the result of repressed same-sex attraction due to shame and guilt, the self-hatred then directed outward. In broader terms, whatever I accuse someone of in terms of an unforgiveness is something I have condemned myself for in the past, but have repressed the accusation. It's not that I have necessarily done the same thing on the level of form, killed someone to steal some money, for example, but that I have done the same thing symbolically. In this case, disregarded another person's value, rights, and welfare in order to benefit myself. And though I mightn't have done something as horrific as murder on the level of form, I can remember from my own experience that acting from a one or the other mentality came from fear, not evil. The next step is to ask for help within our mind, turning to something that symbolises a non-ego presence that is a link to our source, to answer our own need for forgiveness. The Course uses the term Holy Spirit for this link, or memory of love, and it is through the Holy Spirit that we are provided with a transcendent perspective above the battleground of the world that answers our call to be free of fear. This perspective reminds us of our wholeness, of our eternal innocence as a spiritual self, and in recognising our common fear, we are able to move on. Turning for help to the Holy Spirit, our inner teacher, is also important because it affirms that we're not alone. The ego, after all, is built on a thought of separation, of being on our own, self-created and self-reliant. Subtitle: Correction from the Bottom Up. Where mindfulness would have us feel what we feel but drop the storyline, in other words, not indulge our thoughts, the Course encourages us to look at an intense emotion as an opportunity to let go of shame and guilt. This is particularly helpful when we feel resistance to looking at the specifics of an emotion and associated thoughts. Our resistance is a sign that we have made the underlying issue a big deal and are afraid to look at it. It's in looking at it, however, that we can reassess what has caused us distress in the past and bring it down to size. In such cases, simply trying to regard our thoughts and feelings as transient phenomena might be used as a form of denial. What we resist persists, as the old adage goes. Quote from the Course: "No one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them, for not looking is the way they are protected." End of quote. In the Course's Song of Prayer pamphlet, forgiveness is described as prayer's ally, offering wings to prayer to make its rising easy and its progress swift. While the Course says that, quote, "a sense of separation from God is the only lack you really need correct," end of quote, it is also clear that its path of forgiveness is an indirect way of eventually learning that we remain at home in God. We can reflect on metaphysical truths of oneness if we find it helpful, but the crux of forgiveness is that we fly to heaven by forgiving each other in appreciation of our shared calls for help, our shared need. This is how we acknowledge our unity. By addressing my relationship with you, I address my relationship with God. Quote, "Your way will be different, not in purpose, but in means. One instant spent together with your brother restores the universe to both of you." End of quote. Buddhism, as discussed in Part 1, is concerned with the idea of me, not the various forms that idea takes: my trauma, my past, my abandonment, my failure, my injustice. Psychological analysis therefore doesn't play a part in the Buddhist practice of recollection. The Course, through its emphasis on addressing shame and guilt, takes us a step back. We first look at the me we think we are so we can undo the shame and guilt surrounding it, thereby enabling us to take our me less seriously. We look at what we believe about ourselves so we can move beyond ourselves, and we move beyond our fear of looking by turning to the Holy Spirit, who will help us see there is nothing to be afraid of. Quote, "We will undo this error quietly together and then look beyond it to the truth." End of quote. Since we experience ourselves as a body, the forgiveness process applies correction at this level of awareness. First, we believe that we need to forgive someone else for what they have done, but then we realise it's about forgiving ourselves. Then, eventually, we realise that our unhappiness stems from guilt from having chosen an I separate from our source. But we start where we are, in the world of specifics, and then work our way up to the more abstract level behind our experience of suffering. Quote, "The idea of orders of need, which follows from the original error that one can be separated from God, requires correction at its own level before the error of perceiving levels at all can be corrected. You cannot behave effectively while you function on different levels. However, while you do, correction must be introduced vertically from the bottom up." End of quote. As we correct shame and guilt related to our worldly identity, we get closer to accepting and trusting the truth of the abstract level that says neediness arises when we've deprived ourselves of our true heritage. Before we address the abstract, therefore, and even the Course's forgiveness step of withdrawing our projection, as in, would I condemn myself for this, we need to go through the pain of having believed that we have been hurt, abandoned, betrayed, abused, or forgotten. We'll experience shame, guilt, and undoubtedly anger and sorrow. We need to let ourselves go through this because it's there. We have made some aspect of our past, our lives as bodies in the world, very real, not nothing. And this is the source of our fear. Quote, "The dynamics of the ego will be our lesson for a while, for we must look first at this to see beyond it, since you have made it real." End of quote. Forgiveness occurs as we learn to not take what has happened in the past personally, and to realise that anything someone else says or does that isn't loving must come from fear. This is how we let go of judgment and of our childhood neediness that required others to act a certain way in order for us to feel secure. This is how we move on and into a sense of our own inner strength and maturity, which involves an acceptance and reliance upon our inner teacher for help. Subtitle: Suffering and Guilt. Buddhism offers a way to end our suffering by letting go of desire and aversion. This, obviously, is based on the premise that we don't want to suffer. The Course, however, suggests that our suffering, our inner experience of suffering, not to be confused with externals, is the result of a choice made for two reasons, both of which relate to our identification with guilt. As mentioned earlier, one way of magically getting rid of guilt is to repress it, then project it out onto others. Suffering plays a role in this projection as it can serve as evidence that someone else is sinful and that we are innocent. Quote, "Beware of the temptation to perceive yourself unfairly treated. In this view, you seek to find an innocence that is not theirs but yours alone, and at the cost of someone else's guilt." End of quote. In the world of duality, if I am innocent, you must be guilty, and vice versa. This is the kind of stuff that goes on unconsciously and is why our closest relationships can paradoxically be the ones most filled with conflict. They are just so handy. Quote, "You think your brother is unfair to you because you think that one must be unfair to make the other innocent. And in this game do you perceive one purpose for your whole relationship." End of quote. This helps to explain some of the ridiculous things couples fight over. Recently, for example, I watched a clip from Jimmy Kimmel's television program in which Kevin Bacon and Kyra Sedgwick act out, quote, "a dumb fight from a real couple." The argument is over ice cream. Kevin's character comes home with 2 tubs, mint chocolate chip and cookies and cream. Kyra hates mint chocolate chip. Kevin loves both, and he dishes up 2 bowls of cookies and cream. He can have mint chocolate chip later. Hostilities ensue. Kevin is an inconsiderate, quote, "ice cream hog" for eating what Kyra likes when she can't have any mint chocolate chip, and Kyra, quote, "can do the shopping next time." End of quote. Kyra eventually storms out the room and Kevin starts crying, but both are winners in the egos game, each claiming suffering at the hands of the other. Suffering also attracts us as a way of mitigating punishment from God in the future. Each time we choose to identify with the ego, we identify with separating from God and becoming a fugitive, on the run from his reprimand. In our suffering of any kind, we say to God, "Look at how much pain I'm in. Surely you would have mercy on me rather than kick me while I'm down." This is also why feelings of success and triumph can shortly be followed by an act of self-sabotage or anxiety. We can also, of course, sabotage a relationship. Perhaps Kevin had an inkling that sharing equally in the chocolate chip ice cream would have annoyed Kyra. Ultimately, forgiveness relies on our willingness to let go of our need to see someone else as sinful. We're not asked to try and see ourselves and everyone else as spirit, but whether we want to see each other as sinless. Quote, "Your question should not be, 'How can I see my brother without a body?' Ask only, 'Do I really wish to see him sinless?' And as you ask, forget not that his sinlessness is your escape from fear." End of quote. We don't deny what someone has done, only our interpretation of it. Instead of an expression of evil, we recognise attack as a call for help. Without understanding our motivation for suffering, there's only so much that relationship counselling or business coaching or investment advice, visualisation, etc. can do. We are our own worst enemy until we address our guilt. Everything is hard and we become weary. Now we come to the conclusion. Subtitle, Contented Rest. In contrast to the hard slog of life as an ego, the Buddha went about his day with ease, without doubt, without fear. He could do this because he had moved beyond desire or hatred, beyond emotional investments, beyond shame and guilt. And here's a quote from a Chinese Taoist poem. The highest way asks nothing hard. Only do without desire or hatred, and all will become clear and open. End of quote. When we're not striving for this or that, we can carry a sense of rest with us, no matter how busy we are. In the Course's philosophy, rest is the natural byproduct of knowing we don't have to do anything for our salvation, that we are sinless, loved, and safe. Quote, when peace comes at last to those who wrestle with temptation, when the light comes at last into the mind given to contemplation, or when the goal is finally achieved by anyone, it always comes with just one happy realization: I need do nothing. End of quote. And so, as we practice mindfulness or the Course's forgiveness process, or employ both as we see fit, we can be assured that the effort and commitment is worth the experience we aspire to. And here's a quote from Workbook Lesson 107. Can you imagine what a state of mind without illusions is? How it would feel? Try to remember when there was a time, perhaps a minute, maybe even less, when nothing came to interrupt your peace, when you were certain you were loved and safe. Then try to picture what it would be like to have that moment be extended to the end of time and to eternity. Then let the sense of quiet that you felt be multiplied 100 times, and then be multiplied another 100 more. And now you have a hint, not more than just the faintest intimation of the state your mind will rest in when the truth has come. End of quote. And that is the end of part 2 of the essay. From rereading the essays now, what stands out for me again is the Course's emphasis on what we want, on our desire for the truth or for the ego and specialness. We just don't realise consciously that when we choose the ego and for specialness, that we are choosing suffering. When we identify with the ego, suffering then takes on a major purpose as a defence mechanism. We think suffering has chosen us, but it's actually that we who have chosen that suffering. And again, by suffering, I mean the inner experience of suffering, that lack of inner peace. We have thrown it away. And that section in the Course, the obstacles to peace, I think the first obstacle is the desire to get rid of peace. Our desire to get rid of peace, to throw it away, is the first obstacle to having peace. If we want to be special, if we want to maintain an identity as I, me and mine, then peace, inner peace, is a threat to that. And the Course really emphasises that more than any other spiritual system, I believe. I hope you have found this discussion helpful. Tune in again. Thank you. Bye.